I opened the drawer where I kept my pension documents and found nothing but air. The thick folder with my banking information, medical coverage, and old will had vanished. For a moment, I just stood there. My fingers hovered where the paper should have been, as if disbelief could summon it back. I knew exactly who had touched it. And I knew exactly what she wanted. 2 weeks before, my daughter-in-law, Ava, had smiled sweetly as she handed me a cup of tea and said, "You really shouldn't stress yourself with all that financial stuff. Let us take care of things." She said it like a kindness. But it felt like a quiet dismissal. That morning, with my heart thudding and my hands shaking, I understood. This wasn't about helping me. This was about removing me, piece by piece. People think growing old means growing helpless. What they forget is that survival teaches you how to wait, how to watch, and how to strike. Ava thought she was playing chess. She never noticed the board was mine. If you've ever trusted someone who smiled in your face while quietly plotting behind your back, then you already understand what I felt in that moment. Tap that like button and subscribe now. My name is Margaret Greene. I'm 68 years old, retired after 37 years as a social worker. I used to spend my days standing beside people no one believed. Women who were pushed aside. Children who weren't heard. I thought I'd left that part of my life behind when I turned in my badge and shut down the office. I thought I'd earned some peace. After my husband passed, I poured my time into quiet things. Gardening. Cooking. Reading long novels I'd put off for decades. I lived alone in the same house Daniel grew up in. 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, and a porch that looked out over birch trees and slow sunsets. It was more than enough. Daniel, my only son, had always been gentle. Smart. A boy who liked puzzles and stayed up late drawing diagrams of how things worked. I raised him to think for himself. But when he married Ava, something shifted. Slowly at first. Like water soaking into wood. Ava came into our lives in a crisp white dress and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was sharp, confident, always dressed like she was heading to a meeting. She called me Margaret from the beginning, never Mom. Said it was more respectful. I believed her. I wanted to. When Daniel lost his job unexpectedly, they asked to stay with me for a few months. Just to get back on their feet. It sounded temporary. Reasonable. So I said yes. The first week was fine. Ava was polite. Gracious, even. She offered to handle the groceries. Took over the kitchen like she was settling in. Rearranged the pantry, tossed out my spice jars because they were too old. She laughed when she said it. I smiled. But something in me cooled. By the 3rd week, mail stopped coming to my name. Ava explained she was just streamlining everything. Less confusion. Bills and notices began arriving in Daniel's name. Then hers. I remember the first time I couldn't find my checkbook. I turned the house upside down. Ava walked in holding a stack of folded laundry and said, "You probably left it somewhere silly. Want me to look for you?" That smile again. Practiced. Sympathetic. I told her no, thank you. She started offering to manage my online payments. "Too much screen time isn't good for you," she'd say. "Let me just log in and handle it." I didn't hand her my passwords. But one night, I found her using my tablet. Said she needed to check something. I didn't say anything. I just watched. The worst part wasn't what she did. It was how Daniel didn't see it. When I brought up little things, like how she'd moved my medications or changed the Wi-Fi password without asking, he'd rub the back of his neck and sigh. "She means well, Mom." Tried to be patient. He wasn't cruel. He just wasn't looking. I started feeling small in my own home. Decisions were made without me. Conversations happened behind closed doors. I stopped being asked about what we should have for dinner. Stopped being part of the rhythm of the house. One afternoon, I overheard Ava on the phone. She was in the guest room, door cracked open. "We're almost there," she whispered. "Her accounts are a mess, but once we have access, it's just paperwork. I've already called the bank." I stood frozen outside that door. Something inside me broke open and kept falling. I waited until she left to call her sister. I needed to hear that I wasn't imagining things. Her sister sounded uncomfortable. "Ava mentioned you'd signed over some financial stuff," she said. "Just to make things easier." I hadn't. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, holding a photo of Daniel when he was 5. Missing front tooth. His smile lopsided and true. I looked at that photo and asked myself, when did my boy stop seeing me? A week later, I found the drawer empty. The folder gone. And I knew. They weren't just managing things. They were erasing me. It started with the bank. A letter arrived addressed to me, but the handwriting on the envelope was Ava's. Inside was a statement for a refinance application. My home, the place I had lived in for over 40 years, was being processed for a new mortgage. I had never signed anything. I had never asked for a single change. I confronted Ava in the kitchen. She was rinsing blueberries into a glass bowl. I held up the letter, my voice steady. "Why am I getting refinance documents?" She blinked, dried her hands slowly, and smiled. "Oh," she said, "Daniel and I were exploring options. You're always saying the house needs repairs. We thought we could help." "I didn't ask for that," I replied. She tilted her head, as if explaining something to a child. "We thought it was time to plan ahead. You know. Just in case." After that, she became more emboldened. My electricity was cut off for 4 hours one morning. Ava claimed the bill must have been auto-paid incorrectly. I called the company. They told me the auto-pay had been cancelled. I hadn't cancelled it. Neither had Daniel. Meals began appearing in the freezer. Packaged, processed, portioned. When I asked Ava about them, she said, "It's easier for you this way. No more standing at the stove." I told her I liked cooking. She smiled again, and said, "But we're taking care of you now." That word, taking, sank into my chest like ice. My tablet, the one I used for online banking, stopped recognizing my password. Ava offered to reset it. I refused. That evening, it disappeared from the coffee table. The next day, she handed it back, saying she found it behind the couch. Everything had been logged out. Then came the medical forms. I received a call from an insurance company about a new supplemental plan I supposedly enrolled in. I hadn't. They read back the details, email address, phone number, signature. All correct. But I never touched the application. I asked for a copy and held it in shaking hands. My name was written in cursive, but the loops were wrong. Too clean. Too confident. I brought it to Daniel. He frowned, read it, and said, "Mom, maybe you forgot. These things happen." The final straw came on a Thursday afternoon. I had gone out for a walk, trying to clear my head, and returned to find strangers in my living room. A man and a woman, mid-30s, holding a notepad and walking from room to room. Ava followed them, explaining square footage, insulation, and the potential for renovations. I stood there, in my own doorway, invisible. When I finally spoke, they turned. Ava didn't flinch. She said, "These are just some people from a real estate agency. I wanted to get a sense of your property's value. It's important for future planning." I didn't respond. I walked to my room and locked the door. I stayed there until long after they left. That night, Daniel knocked softly. Ava didn't mean anything by it. She's just looking out for everyone. We're all under stress. I said nothing. The next morning, a woman from Adult Protective Services rang the doorbell. She introduced herself kindly, said she'd received a call expressing concern over my mental clarity. Said someone had filed a report claiming I was increasingly confused, possibly unfit to handle personal affairs. She asked me a series of questions. I answered each one, calm and clear. At the end, she paused, then looked me in the eye and said, "You seem very capable to me. But I have to file the report anyway." I knew Ava had made that call. She wanted legal control. Guardianship. I was no longer just being managed. I was being hunted. That evening, I sat in the dark with the lights off, listening to the quiet hum of the fridge, the soft creak of the floorboards. The house no longer felt like mine. But I didn't cry. I reached for the notebook I used to keep recipes in and turned to the last page. I wrote a single sentence. If they think I'm disappearing, they've never seen me rise. The following morning, I left before sunrise. Ava was still asleep. Daniel's door was closed. I walked 2 blocks to the local library, where I signed into a public computer using an old email I hadn't touched in years. It took me 20 minutes to reset all my bank passwords. Another 10 to request printed statements from the past 6 months. When the first batch of papers arrived in the mail a few days later, Ava raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" she asked, motioning to the envelope. "Just some health records I wanted to review," I said softly. She didn't press. I kept the statements hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my closet. In that same space, I placed a voice recorder I had ordered online using a prepaid card. I set it up in the kitchen. Every morning before breakfast, I turned it on and slid it behind the fruit bowl. Every night, I listened. I heard Ava on the phone with someone named Jordan, complaining about how long it was taking to shift the accounts. I heard her call me a liability. A slow burn. I copied every audio file onto a USB drive I kept tucked into the hem of my coat. I reached out to Sylvia next. She had retired from the legal aid office 2 years before I did. We hadn't spoken in months, but when I told her what was happening, she didn't hesitate. "Come over," she said. "Bring everything." She introduced me to a lawyer named Rachel Dunn. Young, sharp, direct. Rachel reviewed the forged documents, the audio, and the bank activity. She didn't say much at first. Just nodded. Then she looked at me and said, "This is systematic financial abuse. We're going to stop it." I had spent weeks feeling like a shadow. Like I was slipping out of my own life. But sitting in that quiet office, with papers spread before me and a plan forming, something in me returned. I remembered who I was. The woman who had once stood in courtrooms for children too frightened to speak. The woman who never backed down from a system designed to fail the vulnerable. Rachel drafted a formal complaint to the bank. She began filing paperwork to freeze access to my accounts. She scheduled an appointment with a forensic specialist to verify the forged signatures. Every step was documented. Every move, planned. At home, I played the role they expected. I asked Ava to help me understand a bill. I pretended to lose track of time. I mumbled just enough. And Ava believed every second of it. "You're doing great, Margaret," she said one evening, handing me a glass of water. "You're lucky to have us." I took it, smiling faintly. In truth, I had never felt less lucky. But I had never felt more ready. Each night, I opened the notebook again and added a line. Notes, observations, receipts. A record of their cruelty, spoken in soft tones and gentle acts. I no longer trembled. I no longer doubted. They had built a careful illusion. But I was building something stronger. Something real. Something sharp. They thought they were planning ahead. They had no idea what I had already set in motion. It began on a Monday. Ava had an appointment at the bank. I knew because I overheard her reminding Daniel the night before. She was finalizing paperwork to move the refinance forward. She didn't know Rachel had already contacted the fraud department. She didn't know her appointment had been flagged. I arrived at the bank 10 minutes before her and sat in the waiting area, a soft scarf around my neck, my coat zipped all the way up. When Ava walked in, she froze. Her eyes darted from me to the manager who now stood behind the counter, expression unreadable. "Mrs. Greene," the manager said, "could we speak privately?" Ava turned to me. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Inside the small office, Rachel sat waiting. She had documents arranged in a neat stack. A voice recorder sat at the center of the table. The manager closed the door behind us. Rachel pushed forward a folder. "We have evidence of forgery, unauthorized account access, and intent to commit financial fraud against a protected individual." Ava's face hardened. She reached for a smile, but it broke before it formed. "This is ridiculous," she said. "She asked for our help. She's not well." Rachel nodded once. Then she played the audio file. Ava's voice filled the room, clear and sharp. She laughed. Called me senile. Described how easily she could push the paperwork through. The silence after the recording ended was long and cold. Ava stood and left the room without another word. The next day, I served Daniel and Ava both with legal notifications. They were no longer permitted access to my accounts, property, or healthcare decisions. Daniel called twice. I didn't answer. On the third attempt, I picked up. "Mom, this is crazy. We were just trying to help." I paused before responding. "No, Daniel. She was trying to take. And you let her." That night, they moved out. The house felt still again. For the first time in months, I opened my bedroom door without hesitation. I left lights on. I cooked my own dinner. Slowly, my space returned to me. But I wasn't finished. I met with a real estate attorney, had the house retitled under a living trust with only my name. I sold it within weeks. Quietly. Cleanly. The funds were wired directly to a secure account. Then I left Ohio. A small cottage in Vermont had caught my eye years ago. I had always imagined retiring there, surrounded by fir trees and mist. I purchased it in full and moved in on a clouded morning in early March. Weeks later, Ava received a final notice through Rachel's office. It outlined the revocation of all financial privileges and the documentation of the fraud investigation. Ava never responded. I did not need her words. The revenge wasn't in destroying her. It was in protecting what she tried to steal. And reminding her that I was never the victim she imagined. The investigation moved forward without noise. Ava's name was formally reported to the State Elder Abuse Registry. Rachel filed all documentation with the Financial Crimes Unit. The paper trail was clean, undeniable, and damning. Within a month, Ava's employer was notified of the pending case. She worked in private insurance, and though she wasn't arrested, she was quietly let go. Her licensing board opened an inquiry into her ethics. Daniel called once after that. I let it ring. My lawyer advised me that Ava would likely face civil penalties but not jail. That was fine by me. I didn't want her behind bars. I wanted her reputation cracked wide open. I wanted the image she carefully curated to decay in the daylight. From what I heard, she moved back in with her sister. Daniel found a studio apartment. No forwarding address was left. I didn't need one. The house was gone. My name was clean. My savings were intact. More than that, I had walked back into myself. Fully. Silently. Without their permission. On my second week in Vermont, I stood barefoot on the wooden porch of my cottage. There was still snow in the corners of the yard, the trees gray and towering. I stood there for a long time, the air cold against my skin, and I breathed without fear. That was the real justice. Not revenge. Freedom. Looking back, it wasn't the forged signatures or the stolen control that hurt the most. It was the quiet way they erased me. The soft, deliberate choices made behind my back. As if I had already disappeared. People talk about growing older like it means fading. But I have never felt more visible. Not because I shouted, but because I refused to vanish. Ava taught me something I didn't expect to learn this late in life. That dignity is not something others preserve for you. You hold it. You protect it. Even if your hands shake while doing so. I don't hate her. I don't even carry anger. What I carry now is knowing. A clear, steady understanding of who I am, and who she tried to rewrite me into. And Daniel, he made his choices. I made mine. The woman sitting here today is not broken. She is watchful. Whole. And quiet only when she chooses to be. That house was never just property. It was my line in the sand, and I never stepped back. Have you ever been treated like your silence meant weakness? Or watched someone mistake your kindness for an invitation to take what was never theirs? If you've lived through betrayal masked as care, tell your story in the comments. You're not alone. Here, we speak for the ones who were almost erased. And we remember that the strongest voices don't need to shout. Subscribe for more stories where justice isn't loud or cruel, but deliberate and lasting. Because sometimes the quietest revenge is simply taking your life back and closing the door behind you. And when you do, let it be with peace. Not apology.